An expedition in search of capitalist success runs into the harsh environments of Africa. I discuss this and more on today's episode. Welcome back to Around the Weird, a booktube channel where I talk about all the unusual and out of the ordinary literature that I've found in my travels. Today is a bit of a strange story as it focuses on sign language using gorillas and diamonds. I am referring to Congo by Michael Crichton, which was published in 1980. For those who don't know, Michael Crichton is an American writer, or was an American writer who lived between the 40s and the mid 2000s as he died of cancer. He was known for writing science fiction stories, although his earlier career he wrote under a pseudonym and wrote romance stories, it seems. And he's really well regarded for his books, including Jurassic Park, Timeline, Congo, and The Andromeda Strain, some of which have been turned into movies. And he was also somewhat responsible for Westworld, the science fiction movie. And he also had a hand to play in Twister, which was a fun movie. So a pretty interesting author. He had his political leanings that were pretty strange, but for the most part he was an interesting writer. So without further ado, let's talk about Congo. I will do a summary, a little bit of analysis, and we will move on from there. So Congo focuses on two characters mostly. Karen Ross, who is a scientist working for ERTS, an information gathering company that sells this info to clients. And this is working out of Houston, and it also focuses on Peter Elliot, a primatologist, is that a word? Primate scientist who has taught sign language to a gorilla named Amy, who frequently travels with him. At the beginning of the book, we see that Karen Ross and other scientists watch a relayed video from an expedition in Africa in search of diamonds at an ancient city named Zenge, but on the video, everyone is killed, and they see an unseen enemy that looks vaguely gorilla-shaped. This pushes Karen to be more intrigued, and she wants to actually lead the next expedition because it's very important that they succeed in this endeavor to find the city of Zenge and the apparent diamonds that it holds. And her bosses are hesitant to send her, but they agree to do so, and she request that she bring along a primate scientist named Peter Elliot, who was already planning on going to the Congo with his ape Amy because she's been having strange dreams related to the Congo, and he feels the need to take her there so he can better understand her. And when they fly there, they land in Zaire, or Central Africa, and they recruit Captain Monroe as a guide, and they also discover that they are, they don't discover, they know, but they stumble across the consortium, a group of Japanese, German, Chinese businessmen who want to also acquire the diamonds for political, scientific purposes. These groups actively sabotage one another. Amy ends up stolen, but they find her in a junkyard a short while later. And in an effort to get to the ancient city, they attempt to fly as close as possible. But they end up having to parachute into the jungle due to a war that has broken out, and people are shooting missiles at them, which results in Amy having to skydive with someone else's help. It's successful, but Amy doesn't like it. She doesn't like flying in general. And when they get into the jungle, they find harsh, very wet environments, pygmies, a lot of rapids, and hippos and other creatures that want them dead. They unfortunately discover or hear that the consortium has arrived at the site first, but they still decide to keep traveling to there. They encounter a human boneyard, and they don't really know what caused this to happen. Amy is spooked by all of this, and they eventually discover the wrecked plane of the consortium as it was hit by a missile from the ground. And they encounter the consortium campsite where all the members appear to be dead and killed by some strange thing, which Amy refers to as bad things. Amy isn't quite clear as to what that is. That is watching them from afar at this point. And Amy just decides to run away, and she hangs out with some other gorillas in the meantime. Elliot looks for her, but realizes that she'll come back when she wants to. And they arrive at the lost city of Zenge, where they look around for the diamonds, and they discover a lot of the city's history. Amy ends up returning at this point and talks of these bad things, and even there's some insinuation that she knows more than she's letting on, but she's not really willing to tell of anything. And these strange gorilla creatures attack, hurt some people in the camp, but they the camp also manages to wound these gorillas. And one of the creatures is dead, and Peter studies it, realizes it's kind of a new species of gorilla, and he wants to name it after himself, and he's hoping he can take a sample home of a skeleton or something like that. And he also kind of realizes that the gorillas are speaking in a new form of language, and are also incorporating their own sign language into their conversations. They investigate further in the city of Zenge and discover that the people of Zenge use these gorillas to guard the mines, because you couldn't really corrupt the gorillas in any sort of way. And so long after the people have left, the gorillas are still guarding the mines and killing anyone who approaches. They're dealing with continued gorilla attacks at this point, and they attempt to learn the gorilla language and create a recording that'll communicate to the gorillas. And in fact, they managed to do that, but not before their camp gets destroyed by the gorillas. After the gorillas leave, they manage to locate the mines, and they discover that the diamonds are still there, the exact kind of diamonds that they need. And Karen proceeds to set a bunch of mines, or charges inside the mines to make it easier to get the stuff, even though Captain Monroe realizes that this is probably going to cause devastation to a nearby volcano. And Amy ends up grabbing the detonator and using it, which blows up the mines and buries the diamonds, but also it causes a nearby volcano to explode, which is a pretty fascinating bit of writing that takes place. Zenge is destroyed in the process by the volcano, and it's implied that the gorillas are also killed in the process. They manage to make it back to the consortium's airplane and are attacked by a native tribe. It's kind of been pursuing them throughout the entire story. They manage to find a balloon inside the airplane and use it to escape. And as the story comes to a close, everyone sort of goes their separate ways. Karen finds a job at some other organization. Captain Monroe is hunted by people, but still manages to do his mercenary and gun running work. And Peter eventually takes Amy back to the Congo and releases her, where she has a child that she teaches sign language. Eventually Amy is never seen again, and that's where the story ends there. In terms of analysis, there is quite a bit worth talking about with Congo. It's a very fascinating, very well-written story, I would say. Maybe one of Crichton's best. I think I enjoyed it maybe a little bit more than Spear, which I read pretty recently. I certainly think it has a better ending than that story. And I might like it about as much or maybe a little bit more than Timeline, which I consider to be one of Crichton's better stories, along with Jurassic Park, of course. And there's a number of reasons why I think this is pretty good. One of the reasons is because of the theme of capitalism that is pervasive throughout the story. Crichton seems to criticize capitalist exploitation in this story, or if not outright criticizing it, he at least calls attention to it, which allows us to acknowledge what the problem is, what's causing all these troubles in the story. ERTS, the organization that Karen works for, is manipulating Africa for the sake of profit. And they're causing a lot of pain and suffering on the ground. But they're also fighting the consortium for the diamonds. They want money so badly. They want the success of this contract so badly that they're willing to sabotage the consortium and maybe hurt a few people in the process. Typical capitalist exploitation, capitalist shenanigans there. And a lot of this results in pillaging Africa for its resources in the modern day, but this is a historical thing. In the wake of the 1800s, there was that mad scramble for Africa among the European nations that all wanted a piece of Africa, and they ended up exploiting and hurting the people who lived in Africa, taking away their autonomy in many cases. And that's happening in the present day, as Crichton is showing, through neo-colonialism, where there aren't countries really anymore trying to take control of African nations. They're more corporations, which are still exploiting these African nations in the same way, taking away their resources and autonomy, and leading to further exploitation, like you see in modern Congo right now, where the rush for lithium and other mineral reserves is resulting in a lot of suffering, a lot of slave labor, and a variety of other things. A lot of corporations supporting strongmen rulers that offer them favorable deals and whatnot. And Karen is kind of a good example of that in the story. She's very ruthless. She does not really care what happens to other people as long as she's successful for the company. She doesn't personally care about Peter or Amy. They're just extraneous variables designed to make things a little bit easier and to confuse the consortium in her eyes. And a lot of this has to do with her personality, where Crichton does a pretty interesting thing where at the beginning of the story, once Karen requests to go to the Congo, her employers refer to a personality test that she took. And one of the personality traits is that she'll become obsessively focused on a goal without considering outside influences or factors as the longer things go on. And it's interesting because that's exactly what happens to Karen in the story. She becomes so mindlessly focused on getting the diamonds that she doesn't ignore that the other porters are getting killed by the gorillas, that the creatures of Africa basically are trying to hurt them, that it's an unsafe disease environment in the jungle, and that exploding the explosive charges in the story are going to lead to volcanic trouble, which Karen knows but doesn't really care about because she's so focused on her goal. And a lot of that has to do with her personality, but still more of that has to do with the fact that she's being rewarded in a capitalist endeavor, that she's very capitalist minded, and is only focused on the money. And if you only focus on the money, you're not really caring about the exploitation or the harm to others that takes place. And I think Crichton even asks in the story, is this human nature? Is this just how human beings are? And there's always going to be exploitation and scientific endeavors that down the road, because he has one of the characters acknowledge that in Africa, in ancient or in primitive times, there was evidence of a person building a house around the time people were still living in caves. So people were always trying to pursue new things, even if that meant trying to transform the environment and causing a little damage in the process. So is it human nature? I would argue that it's not, because if it was, the human beings wouldn't have survived this long. That we are goal-minded and scientific creatures who are always trying to understand the world around us, but capitalism isn't human nature, because other countries show that you can be successful and not have all your entire self invested in capitalism. But to offer his point, he does kind of point out that Zenge is kind of a parallel to what ERTS is doing. Zenge was very interested in harvesting diamonds to make more money, and the way they did that was by exploiting the environment, basically enslaving the guerrillas to serve as mine guards and kill anyone who tried to steal. So basically taking the environment and manipulating it and using it to serve you in a very horrifying manner, I would say, all for the sake of capitalism. That's what happened to Zenge, and Zenge collapsed eventually, not because the guerrillas kind of overran things, but just because they could no longer make money from the mines. But that's kind of happening here as well, where like the ERTS expedition kind of flounders because they did not consider outside influences and what effect they were having on the world around them. And I think what Crichton might be arguing is you may think that you are a master of nature, but you cannot exploit nature for very long, because if you try that, eventually it's going to come back to bite you in the ass, and you're going to have guerrillas attacking you, or you're going to underestimate one part of the environment, and it's just going to end up negatively impacting you. I'd like to say, or like to equate that to what's happening in like Oklahoma and other places where people are fracking, and the fracking is resulting in more earthquakes in areas that had not previously seen earthquakes. So it's interesting to see the parallels that this book has in the modern day here. This story also has the traditional Michael Crichton science bonanza, where he clearly has done his research and he infuses it into the story. He writes in depth about many topics, including primate research and sign language, sound evaluation and recordings, African history, volcanoes, many things like that. Again, it's very clear that he's done a lot of research, and what I think is Michael Crichton does his research and then he just writes a book around that. He really wants to write nonfiction, but he knows that fiction sells more, most likely. I don't know if that's 100% true, but it does seem like that's part of the story. I do think it's interesting because Crichton is right about one thing. He talks about the future of war, how it went from nuclear to focused on computers, and now there's going to be a mad scramble for certain minerals that will lead to advancements where machines take over the function of war, which is exactly what's happening. He wrote that in 1980, and here we are in 2025, where drone warfare is pretty predominant. And not only that, but there is a mad scramble for minerals like lithium and other microelectronic related minerals that will help with drone warfare, or at least will allow for building machine-based rockets of some kind. So he was kind of right he was kind of right about that, and again, that's something that's taking place in the Congo as well, showing that this mad dash for these minerals is just further capitalism, further exploitation. People are getting harmed for the sake of advancements of war, and there are some people, like the people of Africa, who are acceptable casualties, because as long as it's not happening in first world nations, developed nations, then it's fine to do that, which I don't agree with, but and I don't think Crichton agrees with either. But it's clear that some people believe that in this world. I'll also acknowledge that this story, in its science focus, it does have an expedition report style, where it's written in a feature setting, possibly as an evaluation of this expedition that happened, maybe by Karen, who's acknowledging her failures here. It's very interesting. It certainly adds to the overall story, and definitely amplifies the tension when the report acknowledges that something that the characters did will cost them dearly later on. Crichton is also writing about the harsh environments of Africa. Crichton paints an unforgiving picture of the African wilds. There are violent animals in terms of hippos and crocodiles and killer gorillas, moisture, just unlimited water from the jungle, just you're never going to feel dry, disease, the dark jungle, which feels hostile and like it's cradling or curating all of these terrifying beasts and these diseases and whatnot. There's an interesting quote that I would like to read to you from this. As he walked through the forest, Elliot found himself thinking of it as an enormous, hot, dark womb, a place where new species were nourished in unchanging conditions until they were ready to migrate out to the harsher and more variable temperate zones. That was the way it had been for millions of years. And that's an interesting quote, just getting at how the jungle is like a womb with certain conditions, and then people travel out to prepare for the harsher conditions. Not people, really, the animals, the creatures, the diseases and whatnot. It's basically a very hostile world and the African jungle and the African wilderness. And what's funny is that you have these characters coming in, these overconfident, underprepared adventurers or exploiters coming in and trying to take from the world and getting attacked or hurt in the process because of their overconfidence. They think they are the top of the food chain, and that nothing can tear them down, but that overconfidence is something that costs them in the end. And in many ways, this is very similar to Sphere, with Sphere taking place on the bottom of the ocean, and that being a very hostile, unforgiving, hard place to be for long periods of time, and human beings believing that they're the top of the food chain, but end up succumbing to their own minds, among many other things. So very interesting similarities between those two stories, and it's very interesting to show how, in many cases, with Jurassic Park, with Spear, with Congo, Michael Crichton is writing about how these harsh environments can hurt man, can impact man, who thinks they have dominion over the world, but they come to find out that that their overconfidence is costing them, and that there are other things that are possibly more prepared or better adapted to certain environments. There are other fascinating elements of this story, including Amy, who I love as a character. She is a very wholesome gorilla, utilizing sign language, which is important to me as someone who focuses on accessibility and disability. Amy doesn't have a disability, but sign language is a very useful language to use when communicating with others, especially gorillas and people who might be deaf or hard of hearing. But Amy is really well written. I love learning about her, and everything just feels really charming about her as a character. Crichton does a really well job of characterizing a gorilla of all things. I'll also note that even though the story takes place in Africa, it doesn't fall into the traps of usual racism. He's not painting Africa as a backwards place, he's merely painting the environment as a harsh place. There's a point in the story where he talks about cannibalism, but notes that to the people living in Africa, this has been going on for thousands of years, feels very normal to them, and they think we're the weird ones who don't engage in cannibalism. So it's just a simple cultural thing. And if anything, the people of Africa are trying to exterminate those cultures that favor cannibalism and whatnot, because they think that'll lead other nations to treat them more seriously, more favorably. So it's interesting to see the dynamic presented there. But at no point does he ever kind of lean into the usual adventure story trope of the mindless savages of Africa trying to hurt the precious white people, or something that you usually see like that. So I do have to give Crichton credit for making this an actual story rather than a caricature of a world that doesn't really exist. I will say one thing I don't like about this story is the time that it takes in the story to actually get to the Congo. I'd say more than half the story happens before they finally land on the ground in the jungle and do things, which feels a bit slow to me. I feel like it takes forever to set up, which Crichton does because he wants to get in the science and everything first in order to really get you in the mindset of this world, which I can understand, and I don't necessarily think it's a bad thing, but it does make the story feel a little slow in that regard. Anyway, those are my thoughts on Congo by Michael Crichton. A very good story, one that I definitely recommend to you out there. It was written in 1980, but it still feels fresh and fascinating, and a really good adventure story in the vein of like The Lost World, or Jules Verne's Around the World in 80 Days, or things like that. It's very fascinating, and he manages to get you really sucked into this story, especially talking about a place like Africa where people can fall into those usual racist traps, but he manages to avoid that here. If you have anything to say about my review, or if you read the story before, let me know in the comments below. I would love to hear from you and have a discussion about this. Otherwise, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe so that other people can find out about the Congo or Michael Crichton if they don't already know. And until then, I wish you the best of luck in your weird and African adventure related travels. Farewell.